Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out Before Our Friends Electric, how synth-pop became synth-pop. Before Our Friends Electric. I don't know what that seems like incorrect grammar to me, but that's the title, so let's go.
A vision of the future that never properly came. Synth-pop was an ever-present staple of the British charts in the 1980s, a canny fusion of pop sus and technological invention. Its height reflected the increased affordability of commercial synthesizers in the late 1970s onwards. But that doesn't mean that the likes of the Human League, Ultravox, O&D and Gary Numan were the first to splice synths and pop together. So who were the pioneers? What were the essential steps along the way, the key tracks and influences? And how did we get to the point where Our Friends Electric got to number one? This is how synth-pop became synth-pop.
Oh, Our Friends Electric. Okay, so I guess that's the name of a song? Y'all, I don't know much about synth-pop. It was around when I was a kid, but I'm more of a rock guy. You know, guitars and stuff. Drums, real drums. Bass guitar. Organs and Wurlitzers, you know? I remember in the 80s seeing these videos, of course, and thought it was entertaining, but I didn't really relate to it. I didn't wear makeup. Just didn't identify with it. So I really don't know where it comes from. Synth pop. I don't know. Let's see. What's up? Oh, we're going way back. Del Shannon, February 1961, Runaway. Song Runaway, Del Shannon. Why is this? Oh. If I remember the song, it has a little keyboard part in it, right? Something like that. Oh, that's a piano.
The road to synth-pop could start and end with Del Shannon's 1961 single, Runaway.
Okay. Oh, it had an organ solo in it.
No nonsense slab of rock and roll. But the track's key feature is the haunting, yet synthetic, instrumental break. Played by keyboardist Max Crook on his self-redesigned claviolin, dubbed the Musitron, Runaway would be the first time synthetic sounds would impact a song so entirely.
What?
In the immediate, it would spawn other songs that use synthetic sounds for a hook or instrumental, not least the Tornadoes' Telstar a year later.
I always thought those were just organs. But those were synths? I listened to that song Runaway quite a lot. My dad loved it.
But for the most part, Runaway is a synth-pop song in hindsight, and at the time was more influential on the soon approaching proto-punks.
Wow, okay. Delia Derbyshire. Delia Derbyshire? June 1963, Doctor Who. Oh! Song Doctor Who, BBC Radiophonic Workshop. The theme song, right? Right.
Though
Very
composed
synthy.
by Ron Grainer, the theme for BBC sci-fi show Doctor Who was realised by uncredited electronic music innovator Delia Derbyshire.
Right.
For the forcefully ominous sound of that opening, she had been inspired by her childhood experiences during the Blitz in her native Coventry.
The sounds of the air raid sirens. It's an abstract sound, and it's meaningful. You know, there's the sound of the all clear. Well, that's sort of electronic music in those days.
Without the use of keyboard synthesizers, Derbyshire constructed the track through the use of music concrete, or found sounds, using tape loops of a single plucked guitar string for the bass line, as well as white noise and single frequency oscillator waves. She then sped up, reversed, and meticulously spliced together all these elements to create the completed work.
That is so much work. How do you get the tape machines to sync up? Y'all, I'm an audio engineer, and when I first started out, it was all tape. 2-inch tape. Cutting tape is no joke. It's not easy. I cannot imagine putting all those sounds together with tape. What the This woman was a genius.
In 1963, the Doctor...
Like, what? Okay, she took that one recording of a string, down, da, down, down, da, down. The amount of work it would take to do that, down, da, down, down, da, down. That means she had to record that one sound of the string onto another piece of tape for every time you hear it. Every time you hear a note being played, there's a splice in the tape. It's so much faster just to play it. I would have just played it on the guitar. Down, da, down, down, da, down, and it's done. Or, through the whole song. Wow. That's mind-blowing.
The Who theme would be one of the first fully electronic compositions that most people in Britain heard. And for those that grew up with that surreal music blasting out of their television at Saturday tea time, it had a huge impact. For Pink Floyd especially. But all British electronic music starts with Derbyshire's contributions.
Yeah,
but it created this aesthetic for lots of people that make music now. All through the 60s and the 70s, there was this bleak, crazy music on TV shows. And, it's burnt itself into our brains, I think. I think that's the legacy of it, a lot of it, for us anyway,
Wow. She's my new hero. Extreme intellect and patience together in one human being. There she is. She passed away in 2001, just a few months before 9/11, so she didn't have to worry about it. The unsung heroine of British electronic music. Yeah, she influenced Aphex Twin, the Chemical Brothers, and Paul Hartnell of Orbital. I don't know who that is. Wow, and it came from air raid sirens. Yo, you could say Nazis created electronic music. They influenced it, at least. She applied for a position at Decca Records, only to be told that the company did not employ women in their recording studios. They didn't know what they were missing. Decca missed out again. They also turned down the Beatles. Way to go, Decca. You're really picking the winners. When Ron Grainer first heard the Doctor Who theme song that he composed, he was so amazed by her arrangement of the theme that he asked, "Did I really write this?" To which Derbyshire replied, "Most of it." Grainer attempted to credit her as co-composer, but was prevented by the BBC bureaucracy because they preferred that members of the workshop remain anonymous. I mean, the fact that she wasn't credited gives her a little bit more clout, I think. A little bit more credit. Makes her seem humble. She also worked as a radio operator for a British gas pipe-laying project. She struggled with alcoholism. She died of renal failure, brought on by cancer. Okay. The United States of America and Silver Apples. March 1968, the United States of America. June 1968, Silver Apples. Song Oscillation, Silver Apples. Oh, that's cool.
By the late 1960s, the slowly developing technology was seeping deeper into rock and roll. The Beatles had used an early keyboard-based synth called a Mellotron on Strawberry Fields Forever.
Right. Classic.
While Beach Boys' Good Vibrations famously features sci-fi staple, the theremin.
I'm picking up good vibrations, she's giving me the excitation.
But one of the first rock groups where electronic instrumentation was a constant in their sound was the United States of America. Founded in Los Angeles 1967, theirs was a limited budget, so their synthetic sounds were produced from whatever they could find. Said bandleader Joe Bird, the only available functioning keyable synthesizers were Robert Moog's at upwards of $20,000.
What?
We were left with whatever sounds I could squeeze from 3 variable wave shape generators, modulating one another. As well as utilizing oscillators, found sounds, and musical collage, the band also managed to distort their instruments and singer Dorothy Moskowitz's voice with further electronic effects, to the point where they're barely comprehensible.
Wow, that was in 68?
Silver Apples were making similarly synthetic sounds in New York. Initially, they were more of a traditional band setup, before Simeon Cox's various beaten up military surplus oscillators pushed everyone else out of the group. They hated it. When the venue manager said we should play more oscillator, it pissed them all off so much they quit. Except Danny. Joined by drummer Dan Taylor in a live setting, Cox would be surrounded by these machines, having to trigger them in sequence using any extremity he had free at the time. Oscillations from their 1968 debut album showed exactly what this band were about. Its electronic drones, tribal drumming, and detached chanted vocals sounded unlike anything else released in the 1960s. Neither band was particularly successful at the time, but both have since been rediscovered and heralded as electronic pioneers, with Portishead, Broadcast, and Stereolab taking influence from them both, while Silver Apples have also been noted for predating their electronic drone of Noi, White Noise, and Suicide.
I didn't know all that was going on. In the late 60s, Wendy Carlos, October 1968, switched on Bach. Oh, I've heard of that. Is that electronic Bach album? December 1971, A Clockwork Orange. Yeah, that Clockwork Orange soundtrack is very electronic. They took Beethoven songs and performed them with synths. Song, March from A Clockwork Orange, Wendy Carlos.
Born in Rhode Island, new ground was being uncovered by Wendy Carlos. A music and engineering student, she had met Robert Moog in 1964 and helped him fine-tune the prototypes of his namesake synthesizer. In particular, she impressed on him the importance of a touch-sensitive keyboard. Her first album was 1968's Switched on Bach.
That was her? I don't want to skip over this, but she's wearing a suit and she has fake sideburns? Or maybe that's her hair that she's glued to her face? I want to party with Wendy Carlos. What's she up to now? Where'd she run off to? Wendy Carlos. There she is. She's 85 years old. Her birthday is November 14th. She won a Grammy. She's from Rhode Island. She studied at Brown University and Columbia University. Oh, she won 3 Grammys for Switched on Bach. She composed the score to 2 Kubrick films, A Clockwork Orange and The Shining. She did The Shining. Yeah. Some of The Shining soundtrack was straight up classical recordings, like from Giorgio Ligeti. Or no, that was 2001: A Space Odyssey. Maybe he used it for The Shining too. Anyway, in 1979, Carlos raised public awareness of transgender issues by disclosing she had been living as a woman since at least 1968, and in 1972 had undergone sex reassignment surgery. Oh, wait, so born Walter Carlos, okay, so Wendy was born as a man and then became a woman. Good for her. What a trendsetter. That's amazing. To do that back then? I mean, so much criticism must have been flung at her. That's wild.
2 sides of Johann Sebastian's biggest hits, rearranged for the Moog.
Wow.
The instrument, though, was still limited. Not only did it frequently lose its tuning, it was also monophonic, meaning only one key was able to make sound at a time, so recording chords would necessitate multiple overdubs to achieve.
That's a lot of work.
In spite of this, Switched on Bach topped the Billboard Classical chart for 3 years, and was only the second classical album ever to go platinum in the US.
Wow, what was the first? Beethoven's Blues? I don't know. I'm not finding an answer. Moving on.
Many thought that using electronic sounds on Bach's work was sacrilege, but it showed that the instrument's alien electronic sound could be used in a populist manner, said Will Gregory of Goldtrap. Nothing for me lived up to that record. It brought the synthesizer into the mainstream as an expressive instrument, not just a sci-fi effects machine.
Wow.
Mastermind behind I Feel Love, Giorgio Moroder, stated that his passion for electronic music started with Carlos's album. In 1971, Carlos would apply her talents for reconstructing classical pieces for the synth age to the icy dystopian score for Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. or the main theme.
That is amazing. She's getting string-like sounds from a synthesizer back then. I mean, it sounds stringy, doesn't it? Wow.
Or the main theme takes on Henry Purcell. The piece most influential to the evolution of synth-pop was the choral movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
There's vocals in there.
Here, to electronically reproduce the human voice, Carlos used a spectrum follower, a primitive vocoder of hers and producer Rachel Elkine's own design. Kraftwerk's vocals would not sound the same without it. The Human League and Cabaret Voltaire have also noted the soundtrack's influence on their science fiction-based synth-pop.
Wow, y'all. I have a lot more respect for the synth stuff now. We're not even halfway through. We're 10 minutes in. Popcorn, 1969, Gershon, Kingsley, 1972, Hot Butter. Song, Popcorn, Gershon, Kingsley. Okay. I hear guitar and drums in there.
Carlos would not be the only one to be impressed by Moog's technology. The Beatles would use one sparingly on Abbey Road.
That's right. Beautiful.
But so too Gershon Kingsley. A noted Broadway conductor, German-born Kingsley was turned on to the joys of the synthesizer when he met its inventor in the late 60s. Hooked in 1969, Kingsley recorded a showcase album for the instrument called Music to Moog By, mostly consisting of covers. One of the originals would become a plinky-plonky electronic music standard. Popcorn is a classical melody. It could easily be incorporated into a Bach piece. It's so transparent. It's like why you can't change a Mozart melody. It took me 5 minutes, but I could never do it again. Being ahead of its time, the album faced limited success. But in 1972, keyboardist for Kingsley's touring band, Stan Free, recorded his own interpretation of Popcorn under the name Hot Butter.
Hang on. Is that all synth? Because I hear percussion and guitar in there. Popcorn is an instrumental song composed by Gershon Kingsley in 1969 for the album Music to Moog By. It was performed on the Moog synthesizer and released on Audio Fidelity label. Okay, it's not telling me. It just says it was performed on a Moog, so okay, I guess it was.
Change a Mozart melody. It took me 5 minutes, but I could never do it again. Being ahead of its time, the album faced limited success. But in 1972, keyboardist for Kingsley's touring band, Stan Free, recorded his own interpretation of Popcorn under the name Hot Butter. This version would become one of the first fully synthesized songs to be an international pop hit, reaching number 5 in the UK, number 9 in the US, and number 1 in 7 other countries, including Kingsley's native Germany. Since then, its infectious melody has been covered a lot, notably by Jean-Michel Jarre, Aphex Twin, Muse, The Muppets, and unfortunately, The Crazy Frog.
Muse covered this song? Hang on. They sure did. It doesn't sound that much different. Roxy Music and Brian Eno. March 1973, Roxy Music Editions of You. January 1974, Brian Eno, Baby's on Fire. Song, Editions of You. Roxy Music. That sounds like a Wurlitzer.
By 1973, synths were becoming more and more a part of the rock landscape. Pink Floyd, who'd been messing with them since the late 60s, had just released The Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh yeah, it's all over
Odes to Capitol in 7/4 time, the synth sequencer break of On the Run. With its overblown spaciness, was the public perception of synthesizers. Floyd and the virtuoso works of Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Genesis were out of the technical reach of the average musician. It was popular, but it definitely wasn't pop. But then came Brian Eno. Roxy Music had launched themselves the year previous with Virginia Plain, a weirder, more art rock take on glam rock. While fronted by pop art Elvis, Brian Ferry, keyboardist Brian Eno would be the one to listen to for future synth heads. Eno was furthering what sounds he could produce out of the synthesizer, not by seeing how many notes he could play, but how he could stretch and contort those notes to the point of atonality. This is shown especially well on the anti-solo of Editions of You, from 1973's For Your Pleasure. Amid the insistent rhythms, punchy sax, and muscular guitar work, Eno warps his EMS VCS3 to a screeching breaking point. Eno would leave Roxy Music not long after, sick of having to wrestle Ferry for album space. His dives into dissonance would continue with his 1974 debut solo LP, Here Come the Warm Jets. Beneath the scattershot lyricism, the two-noted Babies on Fire features a synth pulse of gleeful amateurism.
Baby's on fire, better throw her in the water.
It's a very peculiar singing voice he chose. Yeah, Brian Eno went on to become this really successful producer. U2, David Bowie, I think, maybe?
Eno proudly never noted his equipment settings, so as to not be limited by what had worked before. For the rest of the 70s, he would experiment with how far he could take the fledgling electronica genre, crystallizing ambient on Another Green World, and refreshing Bowie in the process.
Right. Okay, it's coming together. Kraftwerk, November 1974, Autobahn. May 1978, The Model song Autobahn, Kraftwerk. A lot of people credit Kraftwerk with creating this style.
While British progressive rock was monopolising synthesizers in the UK, in Germany they had a similarly experimental, yet poorly defined, synth-augmented movement known as Krautrock. The jazz-affected stylings of Can, the cinematic ambience of Tangerine Dream,
Okay.
and the droning loops of Noi.
Y'all, that sounds like it was 1982, but this says 72. That could be a U2 record.
And though they all impressed on synth-pop as a genre in their own individual way, none were as important as Dusseldorf's Kraftwerk. They were different, more inspired by American pop than their contemporaries. And unlike Tangerine Dream, who were solely instrumental, Kraftwerk did have vocals, in German no less, damning international commerciality because its tone suited their music. We create out of the German language, the mother language, which is very mechanical, we use as the basic structure of our music. Also the machines from the industries of Germany. 1974's 22-minute long Autobahn was the band realizing their potential.
22 minutes.
A symphonic synthesizer delight. An array of electronic devices were used to recreate the rhythmic mechanized sound of freewheeling down a Central European highway. Various of their own making, not least their famous electronic drums. In 1974, Kraftwerk sounded like the future.
Did you see that drum machine? That sounds happy. I was expecting it to be like aggressive atonal noise, but that sounds happy. Is this a homemade drum machine?
In 1974, Kraftwerk sounded like the future. For the most part though, critics didn't really get the appeal. In a particularly scathing NME review, it was noted as dimly fumbling for approachability, for simple minds only. Surprisingly, the radio edit of Autobahn crept to number 11 in the UK, ensuring their effect on the outer music world. The Model from 1978's The Man Machine would condense their style down into a 3-minute pop song. and be a template for future synth-pop hits. But their influence goes way beyond that. Every single electronic act since has been impacted by Kraftwerk.
That's interesting. Traditionally, I've felt distance from electronic music because I felt like there's no humanity in it, or there's another level of separation between the listener and the person making the music. So you don't really hear the humanity. I think that's something that vocals, of course, give a song. It's easy to connect to. But this Kraftwerk stuff, I feel a little humanity in there. It's like simple.
And be a
like I could hear human beings playing that, you know? Jean-Michel Jarre. Jean-Michel Jarre? Jean-Michel Jarre. Jarre. December 1976. Oxygen. Song Oxygen. Jean-Michel Jarre.
But synthetic music was being made beyond the UK and Germany. Greece's Vangelis was composing atmospheric documentary scores. Japan's Iso Tomita was beautifully synthesizing Debussy.
Wow, that is beautiful.
And France's Jean-Michel Jarre was selling millions of records. Jarre had been making music since the late 60s, but his third album, 1976's Oxygen, would be his breakthrough. Unlike Kraftwerk's preoccupation with driving mechanized rhythms, or Brian Eno's obsession with dissonance, Jarre's focus was more on using electronics to create dreamlike melody. Using a barely functional Mellotron and an EMS VCS3, he conjured otherworldly white noise soundscapes, combined with actual hummable synth refrains, most prominently on Part 4. My primitive drum machine, a Korg Mini Pops, was the sort of thing people played in pubs, but by using sellotape, I can make it play 2 preset rhythms at the same time, creating cool beats. Part 4, which became iconic, was a mixture of slow rock and rock. Initially, its lack of traditional instrumentation, singing, or actual song titles got the album rejected by numerous record labels, them being unsure how to market it. But Oxygen has gone on to sell 15 million copies worldwide, and is the most successful French album of all time.
Really? Wow. I've never heard of Jean-Michel. Jean-Michel. Oh, yeah, Basquiat comes up. He's still alive. He's 76 years old. He's doing great. Look at him. He's still a rock star. This says it sold 18 million copies. As of 2004, he sold 80 million albums and singles. Look, here's his signature if we want to forge a bank loan. Okay, here we go. David Bowie, January 1977. Low, October 1977. Heroes. Song Speed of Life, David Bowie.
The first of his 2 1977 albums, and also the start of his so-called Berlin Trilogy. Low was a sharp left turn for David Bowie, dismissing the hot-blooded American R&B and funk of Fame and Golden Years for something a lot more European. In the depths of cocaine withdrawal, and taking Iggy Pop, Brian Eno and producer Tony Visconti along for the ride. On Low's Side A, Bowie used his band to create a synergy of the rhythmic electronica of Kraftwerk and the art pop invention and ambience of Eno's Another Green World.
Always crashing in the same car.
But Side B reflected Bowie's titular mood all the better.
What did Iggy Pop do during all this? Isn't he a singer? Pop contributed backing vocals. Okay. Good.
An almost wordless, Tangerine Dream-esque sequence of desolate instrumentals. The moment where Eno would truly spin his magic with his EMS AKS. He had no keyboard, just a joystick, and he came up with wonderful sounds you can hear all over the album that weren't produced by conventional instruments.
Wow.
Heroes appeared 9 months later, with King Crimson's Robert Fripp providing the guitars, and the pulsating drone of the title track, furthering the art pop electronica fusion. Tony Bryan and I created a powerful, anguished, sometimes euphoric language of sounds. In some ways, sadly, they really captured, unlike anything else in that time, a sense of yearning for a future that we all knew would never come to pass. Nothing else sounded like those albums. Just like how British punks took the gutter guitar of Ziggy-era Hang On To Yourself and ran with it. Low and Heroes would be essential reference points for the tone and atmosphere of synth-pop.
Yeah, Heroes is very futurist, way ahead of its time. I think I heard that for the first time on some commercial. And I thought it was a contemporary song, but it was 30 years old or something. Okay, I Feel Love, July 1977, Donna Summer and Giorgio Moroder. Song I Feel Love, Donna Summer. Heard this.
While Kraftwerk and Brian Eno were looking at synthesizers from an avant-garde point of view, the Italian Giorgio Moroder saw them as devices capable of the purest pop.
Smart.
And Donna Summer's I Feel Love from July 1977 was his defining statement on the matter, a sneak peek into the future. For this, he would replace the usual disco orchestration with a borrowed Moog modular 3P. I had already had experience with the original Moog synthesizers, so I contacted this guy who owned one of the large early models. It was all quite natural and normal for me. I simply instructed him about what programmings I needed. I didn't even think to notice that for a large audience, this was perhaps a very new sound. Unlike the majority of pop music up to that point, almost everything was handled by machine. Only Summer and the bass drum were real. The song starts with its pulsating bass line and rigid mechanical backbeat. Like Neu or Kraftwerk, if their only purpose was to compel people to dance. As Summer's hypnotic vocal phased in and out, it was the future, but a future that the mainstream listening public instantly understood. I Feel Love went to number 1 in the UK for 4 weeks, and to number 6 in the US. Eno and Bowie were recording Heroes in Berlin when I Feel Love was released. And Eno knew straight away how important it was, excitedly proclaiming, "This is it, look no further. This single is going to change the sound of club music for the next 15 years.
He was right.
He was right, but understating by a vast amount. Italio, EDM, acid house, techno, high energy, electroclash, new disco, all started here. And for synth-pop purposes, any of the bands that made you want to dance, i.e. most of them, took notes from I Feel Love.
Wow. It's amazing that Brian Eno could see that coming. He heard this and thought, this is it. And he was right. Suicide, December 1977. Suicide song, Cheery Suicide. Sounds like an organ.
Suicide had been pissing off New York crowds since 1971. A two-piece composed of the haunted, rockabilly vocals of Alan Vega and the minimalist yet bludgeoning synth and drum machine work of Martin Rev.
He's a screaming the truth.
Their lack of guitars and drums elicited strong negative reactions from their audiences. Every Suicide show felt like World War III in those days. Every night I thought I was going to get killed. The longer it went on, the more I'd be thinking, odds are, it's going to be tonight. On their 1977 debut album,
People get that angry because there's no guitars?
Thinking,
Okay.
odds are it's gonna be tonight. On their 1977 debut album, Rev used a farsa organ distorted with effects, although on later albums he would switch it out for cheap synths. But his rudimentary playing, a self-taught punk rock technique, would push many future synth-poppers to try it for themselves. Despite their confrontational sonics, with Cherie, they even created a twinkling electronica love song. What John Lydon once described
Yeah, I'm hearing an organ in there.
What John Lydon once described as Je t'aime with Tape Hiss. Various UK tours supporting the likes of The Clash and Elvis Costello would get the band's name out there, provoking British synth-pop duos like Soft Cell and Pet Shop Boys. But their sound also impelled industrial, techno and electroclash in their wake.
What?
Industrial, techno and electro
Oh, this is hilarious. Oh, look at that. Funny.
clash in their wake.
Ultravox, November 1977, Hiroshima, Mon Amour. September 1978, Systems of Romance, song Hiroshima, Mon Amour. Ultravox. Okay.
1977 was when Britain took its first steps into synth-pop. In Hull, Throbbing Gristle were experimenting with the synth part.
Throbbing Gristle. Great name.
Synth-pop. In Hull, Throbbing Gristle were experimenting with the synth part, but what they were making was defiantly not pop. But in London,
Yeah, that's one of those where I feel like I don't sense the humanity, other than the voice. Other than the voice.
But in London was Ultravox, currently with an exclamation mark. Initially, they were an art rock group in the vein of Roxy music. But after hearing
I like that. I like that a lot.
they were an art rock group in the vein of Roxy music. But after hearing I Feel Love, the group bought an ARP Odyssey synth and a rolling drum machine and started towards a more synth-pop direction. Closing their fairly punky 1977 Ha 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 album was the romantic synth ballad Hiroshima, Mon Amour.
Hiroshima, mon amour.
While originally released in a more rock-oriented form as the B-side of Rock Rock, the album version combined their electric violin with a preset salsa beat and soaring synth under John Foxx's poignant lyricism.
Walk through Polaroids of the past, features fused like shattered glass.
Hiroshima, Mon Amour stands as the first proper UK synth-pop track. I think no one else had done a song like that before. Nobody had used the drum machine. We tried it as a rock song as well, but it was better with a drum machine. Ultravox would drop the exclamation mark for their third album, 1978's Systems of Romance. And with Kraftwerk,
Oh, that sounded good. Were those real drums? Distorted bass? I like this.
and with Kraftwerk producer Connie Plank, would go fully electronica. But it was too soon. Britain was not yet ready, and the charts remained unclimbed. Fox would leave to start his solo career in 1979, and Mid-Year would replace him, setting the stage for the band's 80s chart domination, with the synthetic melodrama of Vienna and Dancing with Tears in My Eyes.
I've heard of this. The Human League, June 1978, Being Boiled, song Being Boiled, The Human League. I have heard of The Human League. That song, Don't You Want Me? I think that's the title. Don't You Want Me? I remember hearing that on the radio constantly. I was a little kid when that happened. And I remember going off on a trip with my family. We went to Knoxville, Tennessee to visit some friends of my parents. And they had kids. And I don't remember anything else about the trip except that when we were going to sleep, they set us up a little sleeping area in the bedroom of one of the kids, and they had a clock radio on, just like the music was on real soft, and I think I was on a top bunk looking down at the radio, and that Human League song, Don't You Want Me, came on. And I was in this new place with all these new people I'd never met before, but this song was familiar. I'm like, oh, I am connected to the outside world. That's all I remember from that whole thing. It gave me comfort.
Sheffield's The Human League, formed in 1977, inspired more by I Feel Love than Kraftwerk. Their ambition was to be a pop band with synths, a revolutionary concept, and for it, they wrote up a manifesto. They wanted to only use electronic instruments, but they didn't want to write cliched songs about sex or relationships. We were never going to sing songs about love or use the word love. We created quite a challenge because we had to find different subjects to sing about. That's how you get science fiction and philosophical tales. Their first single, 1978's Being Boiled, was the result. Created for merely £2.50, its extremely odd lyricism loomed on top of a...
How do you know it only costs £2.50 to make? How do you calculate that?
Loomed on top of a fully synthetic sci-fi instrumental, propelled by an oh-so-danceable synth-bass riff.
That's danceable? I mean, I can't think of a lot of stuff that's not danceable. There's a rhythm to it, so I guess it's danceable.
Abrasive, minimal, but definitely pop. Bowie, John Peel, and Vince Clarke were fans, inspiring the latter to form Depeche Mode. But Britain as a whole...
How did that song even make it onto the radio? I don't get it. I don't get that.
Clarke were fans, inspiring the latter to form Depeche Mode. But Britain as a whole still wasn't ready, though it sold 3,000 copies in 3 months. Being Boiled failed to chart.
I'm not
surprised. The Human League would release 2 more albums.
I'm surprised it sold 3,000 copies.
The Human League would release 2 more albums before half the band left to form Heaven 17. Singer Phil Oakey remained with the name, scrapped the manifesto, and with the help of 2 schoolgirls, got a #1 in 1981 with Don't You Want Me.
They sing about love, and it worked. Good for them. Okay, The Normal, November 1978, Warm Leatherette. Song Warm Leatherette, The Normal. All right.
In 1977, London's Daniel Miller was in a transitional phase. He'd just broken up with a girlfriend, and in his despair, he'd read Crash by J.G. Ballard, a dystopian novel about a group of people whose sexuality shifts after surviving car accidents. By day, Miller was a film editor, but impelled by the book and with the wave of punk in London, he felt he should be making music. Problem was, he didn't know how to play guitar.
The thing that pissed me off about punk was you had to learn 3 chords to be in a punk band. If you had a synthesizer, all you had to do is press 1 key with a finger, you know.
After buying a Korg 700S synthesizer.
Guitar was not easy enough.
After buying a Korg 700S synthesizer and renting a studio for a day, he created Warm Leatherette. It was the confrontational sound of punk via a synth.
Warm Leatherette.
A dentist drill of a riff.
Wow. A dentist drill of a riff. Yeah, okay, all right.
Leatherette.
A dentist drill of a riff, pummeling the listener, while Miller, in a deadpan tone, recounts evocative aspects of Ballard's book.
Quick. Let's make love before you die.
Miller self-released it as The Normal on his label Mute, which by the 1980s shepherded the likes of Depeche Mode, Yazoo, Erasure, and even some bands that didn't feature Vince Clarke into the mainstream.
How does a song like that instigate a record label and all these acts after it? I would not have seen that. I would not have seen that coming. I don't even understand why that's mentioned on here. I don't like that. I don't like it. I guess I respect it, though.
and even some bands that didn't feature Vince Clarke into the mainstream. The track and its abrasive sonics were also an influence on the slowly calcifying industrial music movement.
Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, May 1979. Electricity, song, Electricity, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. Okay.
When Kraftwerk first played the UK in 1975, a young Liverpool band called Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark was so transfixed that they threw away their guitars and bought synthesizers.
Throw them away?
After a few years learning how their mini-corgs worked, they appeared with their debut single, Electricity.
It took a few years to figure out how the keyboards worked. Oh. Don't just throw your guitars away. Send it to me.
How their mini-corgs worked. They appeared with their debut single, Electricity.
Okay.
Essentially a reworking of the Kraftwerk track, Radioactivity. Albeit with a pop song structure, an actual chorus, and a way peppier synth line. It was released by Manchester's Factory Records in May 1979.
Okay.
OMD's recognition from the synth-pop scene was instant, notably by Phil Oakey of the Human League, Daniel Miller, and Vince Clarke. When I was 18 or 19...
I'm sorry, who's this Vince Clarke fella? They've mentioned him a couple times. Musician and songwriter. He was in the band Erasure. Erasure. He was in Depeche Mode. Yazoo in the Assembly. Okay. Depeche Mode.
That really made me want to make electronic music, because it was so unique. OMD would be a mainstay of the British charts in the 1980s, having later hits with Enola Gay and If You Leave. And though Electricity failed to chart, Synth-Pop would get dragged completely into the mainstream very soon indeed.
Wow. Two Boy Army, April 1979. Our Friends Electric, August 1979. Gary Numan Cars. Song, Our Friends Electric, Two Boy Army.
Tubeway Army were a London punk band. In 1978, when in the studio recording their first album, their frontman, Gary Numan, happened upon a synth. That was when I saw my first ever synthesizer, a mini Moog. When I turned it on, the sound blew me away. In that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I converted all our guitar-based punk songs into electro-punk numbers.
They can't die, they can't just turn off.
Because I had blonde hair, the record company saw me as a pretty boy, punk-pop crossover act. When I came back with this weird electronic stuff, they were furious. But their label, Beggars Banquet's budget had already been blown on the record, so they released it anyway. It didn't chart, but even without the band touring, it made its money back. As such, Tubeway Army was sent back into the studio months later, for album 2, with Numan now writing only for synths. In April 1979, Tubeway Army released Our Friends Electric. With its ominous yet iconic waves of icy synth, this song somehow connected with the listening public, little knowing that the song was actually about a robot prostitute from the future. Charting initially at number 71, then 48, and climbing, the band appeared on top of the pops. Numan, dressed all in black, peering bleakly out into the middle distance, looked almost like a synthetic himself, and that performance got the single and its album Replicas both to number 1. Tubeway Army were dissolved straight after, Numan preferring to release music under his own name. Cars would arrive in September the same year.
Cars came out in 79? Wow. In my mind, it's like 84 or whatever. Now, this song was revolutionary. This was all over the radio. I didn't know Gary Numan was in another band before he was Gary Numan or before he released this. So Gary Numan was in this punk band called Tubeway Army. They were recording an album. He saw Mini Moog in the studio and he pushed some keys and he was like, oh my God, y'all, this is the next. This is everything. No more guitars. We're doing a whole album of Mini Moog. And the band was like, okay. They did it. The record label was furious, as would be a normal reaction, but they put it out anyway, and it made its money back. And that doesn't always happen. So the record label's like, do it again. And they did it again. But better. Why did Two Boy Army break up? Oh, I guess they stayed together. They just decided to release, or Gary wanted to release the music under his own name. Oh, Numan was not even his real name. It was Gary Webb. Okay. At the peak of success, a John Peel session in June 1979 was credited as Gary Numan. Okay. For those that don't know, John Peel was a very influential British DJ, and if he picked your music and put it on his show, you were kind of guaranteed success. He liked Two Boy Army, but after they performed on John Peel's radio show, they dropped the Two Boy Army name and started just being Gary Numan. Numan would, however, keep the same musicians as his backing band on his subsequent solo releases and tours. Okay.
Again, getting to number 1 in the UK, as well as getting to number 9 on Billboard in June 1980. But by charting with that sound, Gary Numan had done what all the other British synth-pop bands had been trying to do for the last year and a half, to no avail. But at the same time, the fact he'd come from nowhere and got to number 1 provoked suspicion from the music press. Despite all synth-pop groups having Bowie in their DNA, Numan was dismissed as a Bowie copyist and a bandwagon jumper. It wouldn't be until the 2000s and his re-entry into the zeitgeist with the Sugar Babes' Freak Like Me that Numan started getting the acclaim and national treasure status he deserved. The next half-decade would be devoted to British synth-pop, building on the work of their predecessors, where groups like Japan, Visage, The Buggles, Spandau Ballet, Soft Cell, Depeche Mode, Duran Duran, The Eurythmics, New Order, Bronski Beat, Talk Talk, Tears for Fears and Pet Shop Boys took over the charts. It was the future that Eno, Bowie and Moroder had envisioned become real. A vision that lives on today in the work of Churches, M83, Charlie XCX, Grimes, MGMT, Sophie, Future Islands, Robin, and so many more.
Yeah.
After however long of people just not understanding this new synthetic music, we have all been assimilated.
Assimilated, it says in the captions. Electronic music is taken over. Pop is synth pop. At this point, I feel like it's all synth pop. It's all electronic drums, synthesizers, maybe a guitar every now and then, and a person singing. Amazing. This video should be called How Synth Pop Became Pop. I didn't realize Gary Numan had such a big thing to do with it, but I guess he did. Cars went to number 1 in '79, and it created this whole wave of the early 80s. Kind of fell out of fashion in the late 80s, I guess. Early 90s. Came back in the late 90s with a vengeance and has been up there ever since. Wow. Like I said, I'm a rock guy. I don't listen to synth pop or even pop music now. I don't even know who's popular. I'm so out of the loop. This was interesting. I learned a lot. I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.